They told you that doctors can always tell the difference between sanity and madness. That psychiatry is precise. That science protects you. But they lied. In 1973, 8 completely healthy people walked into psychiatric hospitals. They had no breakdowns, no delusions, no disorder. Just one small complaint: I hear a voice. That single sentence was enough to trap them. Doctors diagnosed them with schizophrenia. Nurses followed their every move, every note they wrote, every question they asked, every moment of silence, reinterpreted as proof of illness. They acted normal. They explained they were fine. But the more they tried, the deeper they sank into the label. Because once society decides you're insane, nothing you do will ever prove otherwise. And here's the truth no one wants to admit. This wasn't just a mistake. This was an experiment that fooled the entire world. 8 people, perfectly healthy, perfectly sane. They were psychologists, students, even a painter. Ordinary lives, no history of mental illness. But together, they agreed to take part in a dangerous test. The challenge was simple. Could they fool the most powerful system of the mind, psychiatry itself? So, one by one, they walked into hospitals across the United States. From the outside, they looked normal, dressed normal, spoke normal. The only unusual detail was their story. Each one told doctors the same thing. I hear a voice, not a scream, not chaos. Just one faint word repeating in their minds: empty, hollow, thud. That single sentence was enough. Doctors didn't hesitate. Every single person was admitted. And the labels came quickly. Schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. Once those words were written down, everything changed. They weren't people anymore, they were patients. And life inside the hospital was nothing like they expected. At first, they tried to act normal. They spoke clearly, they behaved politely. But nothing mattered. Every action was twisted into proof of illness. If they wrote notes, staff said they were compulsively recording their delusions. If they asked questions, they were paranoid. If they showed frustration, it was a symptom of aggression. Even silence was suspicious. Even boredom was diagnostic. They quickly learned the truth. Once you are labeled insane, everything you do becomes evidence of your madness. And so the experiment grew darker. Some were trapped 4 weeks. One stayed nearly 2 months. Not because they were sick, but because no one would believe they were sane. The treatment wasn't violent, but it was dehumanizing. They were ignored 4 hours. Doctors spoke about them in front of them, as if they couldn't understand. Their identity was stripped away, replaced with a diagnosis that defined every move. And yet, the most chilling detail came from the people no one trusted, the patients. Time and again, real patients whispered to them, "You don't belong here. You're not crazy. You're a journalist. You're a spy." The sick recognized the sane, but the system, the doctors, the experts, the authority, could not. This wasn't just strange. It was terrifying, because it revealed that psychiatry, the science of the mind, couldn't always tell sanity from insanity. This was the beginning of an experiment that would fool not just doctors, but the entire world. Why did this happen? How could the experts, trained doctors, educated professionals, mistake sanity for madness? The answer is simple and disturbing. It begins with labels. The moment a doctor wrote the word schizophrenia, reality itself shifted. That label became a lens. Every action, every word, every silence filtered through it. You were no longer a person. You were a diagnosis. Psychologists call this confirmation bias. Once someone believes a story about you, their mind twists everything to confirm it. If you smile, you're manic. If you frown, you're depressed. If you ask questions, you're paranoid. The same action, endlessly redefined by the story already in place. But there's more. This wasn't just about doctors. It was about power. Because psychiatry wasn't simply a science. It was, and still is, an institution. And institutions thrive on authority. When an expert tells you who you are, you usually believe them. Even if it doesn't feel right. Even if it makes no sense. Because the weight of authority makes you doubt yourself. That's exactly what happened to these pseudo-patients. They knew they were sane. They lived in full awareness that nothing was wrong with them. But the system around them, the doctors, the nurses, the charts, the locked doors, pressed down on them with such force that even they began to feel trapped by the label. And here's the real psychological trap. Once you're labeled insane, you lose the power to argue otherwise. Any defense becomes more evidence. Say I'm not crazy too loudly, and it sounds like denial. Say it calmly, and it sounds rehearsed. Say nothing, and it proves withdrawal. It's a perfect cage. And the Rosenhan experiment revealed something terrifying. That cage doesn't just exist in hospitals. It exists in society. Think about it. How often are people labeled in everyday life? Lazy, weird, difficult, broken. Once the label sticks, perception shifts. Your boss sees you differently. Your friends interpret you differently. Your family rewrites your story. And the worst part, over time, you begin to see yourself that way too. That's the true psychology of the Rosenhan experiment. It wasn't just a trick on psychiatry. It was a mirror, showing us how fragile our sense of self really is when the world decides to define us. The story should have ended there. 8 people fooled the system. Hospitals were exposed, psychiatry embarrassed. But David Rosenhan wasn't finished. He wanted to know something deeper. What would happen if the system knew it was being tested? So he set up a second experiment. This time, one hospital challenged him directly. They said, "We won't be fooled. Send us your fake patients, and we'll catch them." 4 weeks, doctors and nurses studied every new admission. They looked harder. They asked sharper questions. They thought they were prepared. And here's where the twist cuts like a knife. At the end of the study, the hospital was proud. They said they had identified 41 imposters, 41 pseudo-patients, 41 people who didn't really belong, but Rosenhan had sent no one. Not a single fake patient walked through their doors. Every person the hospital accused of being an imposter was real patients, real suffering. Real people, dismissed as frauds by the very experts who were supposed to help them. First, psychiatry couldn't tell the sane from the insane. Now, it couldn't tell the insane from the sane. The system collapsed under its own weight. And that's the twist that made the world gasp. The Rosenhan experiment wasn't just about 8 people in hospitals. It revealed a terrifying truth. That psychiatry, at its core, was more fragile, more subjective, more human than it wanted to admit. Think about the implications. If sanity and insanity can't be reliably distinguished, what does that mean for the millions of people labeled, locked away, or medicated? What does that mean for the very idea of mental illness? And what does it mean for you when an expert, a boss, or even a parent decides to define your reality with a single word? The twist wasn't just that psychiatry failed. It was that society realized how quickly truth could be rewritten. Not by facts, not by evidence, but by labels, authority, and fear. This was more than an experiment. It was a mirror. And the reflection was terrifying. The Rosenhan experiment didn't just expose psychiatry. It exposed something far bigger, the power of perception, the fragility of labels, the way authority can define reality. And here's the solution, the truth you need to understand. You cannot let others write your story. You cannot let a label, a diagnosis, a judgment, or a title define who you are. When someone tells you what you are, pause. When society tells you what success or normalcy looks like, pause. When the world pushes you into a mold, pause. Because sanity, identity, and truth are not written in a chart. They live inside you. They live in your actions, your awareness, your choices. The pseudo-patients in the Rosenhan Experiment were trapped. But you don't have to be. The first step is awareness. Recognize the labels society hands out. See how quickly the mind twists evidence to fit a story. Notice when you begin to doubt yourself because someone else has defined you. The next step is reclaiming your perception. Remember, evidence is not truth. Authority is not reality. The world's definition of you is not the same as your own. And finally, action. Act in accordance with what you know is true. Even if everyone around you insists otherwise. Even if it feels like you're fighting the system. Because sanity, freedom, and identity are built in the small choices you make every day. Here's the final lesson. You may never be able to control what others see. You may never escape labels completely, but you can control how you define yourself. That is the solution Rosenhan's experiment offers. Not rules, not therapy, not institutions, but clarity, awareness, the courage to see truth, even when everyone else is convinced it's a lie. And when you truly grasp that, the world no longer holds the power it once did over your mind. But here's the thing they don't tell you. Even when you see the labels for what they are, even when you understand authority can mislead, even when you reclaim your perception, the system is still out there, waiting, watching, judging, because labels aren't just in hospitals. They exist in schools, offices, governments, families. They exist in every corner of society that decides who is normal, who is sane, who deserves recognition. And it only takes one word, one assumption, one slip of perception to trap someone all over again. The Rosenhan experiment ended decades ago. But the mirror it held up, it hasn't gone anywhere. It's still reflecting the same terrifying truth: sanity is not absolute. Freedom of mind is fragile. And the moment the world decides to write your story, you might never know the difference between reality and what they want you to believe. So the real question isn't about 8 pseudo-patients in 1973. It's about you. How often have you been labeled? How often have you accepted it without question? And the most unsettling question of all, if tomorrow someone decided your story for you, would you recognize your own truth? Or would you believe the lie? Because sometimes knowing the system is fragile is only the beginning of the real experiment.